This is the week ahead, broadcasting from my house. We're still working from home for some of our episodes. This show explores some of the key ideas or elements that will take place over the next 7 days. And of course, we're entering the Chinese New Year period. And of course, this will be a very short weekend and a long weekend and a short week for many of us. Monday, 31st, not many things are happening right now because a lot of people are going to take the 5 day break. On top of that, we're going to have just a 2 day work day, Thursday and Friday. So we're not going to see a lot of activities in terms of reporting, in terms of announcements, in terms of the kind of activities that is going to be done on the corporate front. So, what can we talk about for this week? Well, the thing that will never sleep in Malaysia, at least, is of course politics. And over the next 7 days, Chinese New Year included, we're going to see a lot of temperature when it comes to the political world heating up. In fact, so much so that because of the Johor state election has been announced, we don't know when yet. We're going to see next week the announcement of the Johor state elections to be announced. But for the next entire week, we're going to see some machinations in terms of the political parties aligning themselves. Last week, we spoke about this is going to be a monumental test for Undi 18 approvals. Muda has just started their fundraising campaign. We've seen a lot of political parties claiming that they want to put above 18 or 18, 19, 20-year-olds as possible candidates. And of course, we're going to see a lot of the hundreds of thousands of young new voters coming into the state election for the first time. They're going to vote for the first time. So that is a big test when it comes to Undi 18 that we spoke about last week. This week, we're going to talk about how the Malay-based parties, namely PAS, UMNO, and Bersatu, is going to line up and going to see if they're going to move ahead with some of the political alignment, or they're going to just continue to stand by itself, three parties in one seat, to make it at least a three-corner fight amongst the Malay voter base. So it's going to be a mess in terms of how it's going to be done. So to untangle this, we want to look back into what was being said or done very recently, right? Because Johor Bahru Bersatu Deputy Chief Razrul Anwar Rusli has suggested that Bersatu must work with the opposition bloc, at least for the state election, to face the UMNO-led Barisan Nasional in the Johor polls. So the idea called Muafakat Rakyat Johor was meant to put all the opposition parties as well as Perikatan Nasional in a grand coalition. So we're going to see like a Thanos Avengers kind of movement where everybody else versus UMNO. Now, whether or not this is going to work, whether or not it's going to take place, that's the thing that is going to be a big question mark that's going to be resolved over the next 7 days. There's going to be a lot of postulations from many others. So we've got on the line Dr. Siva Murugan Pandian of USM sharing his thoughts on Bersatu's so-called apparent identity crisis. Let's hear Dr. Siva out.
Well, Anwar have made it very clear. Bersatu is not an opposition party, and why would you want to join the opposition front? Definitely, Bersatu also, I think, although it came from one of their leaders within Johor, at the federal level, they are working within Perikatan Nasional's framework as the ruling government. How a ruling government political party would want to join the opposition at the state level? I think that's the dilemma that everyone will be looking at if ever they want to talk about the collaboration between Bersatu and the opposition, unless after the election, if there are a slim majority, maybe they would want to consider to bring it back to the drawing board room and also to negotiate and discuss. But at this juncture, I don't think Bersatu should work with opposition because they are the ruling government. They may want to use the same strategy used in Malacca. Perikatan Nasional contested on their own all seats. They faced what they call opposition and also Barisan Nasional on their own. And I strongly believe that would be the formula that Perikatan Nasional would want to still test in Johor.
Siva Murugan added that the Johor state elections will be important for upcoming parties such as Muda and Pejuang to test voters' trust ahead of the 15th general election.
With Said Sadiq in Muar, he may want to test ground in Johor to what extent Muda would be able to win some seats. But at this point, although they have decided to work closely with Pakatan Harapan, we have yet to see the distribution of seats, whether it includes Muda, or Muda would want to work on their own, contest on their own, maybe with Warisan, whom they have been working closely. And I think Johor will be good ground to test to what extent the new parties would be able to convince and bring trust, confidence among the voters. If they can do that, I think there'll be a huge impact on the result and also the next GE15.
And of course, while the Bersatu Identity crisis continues to loom over the so-called Muafakat National coalition, the conversation that is happening at Pakatan side is also as interesting. Because as we all know, it's easier if a state election has a number one candidate to be named as Menteri Besar. So there is a common conversation right now because one PKR assemblyman has suggested former Education Minister Dr. Mazli Malik of Bersatu formerly, and of course now he's independent. I presume he's already in PKR right now. To be the potential Johor Menteri Besar should PKR, or in this sense Pakatan Harapan, get the majority or can cobble together enough from their coalition to form a majority in the Dewan Negeri. And of course, this does add to some of the buzz in terms of how things are going to shape up, because Perikatan Nasional might not necessarily agree with such an appointment. So if that whole conversation of how Perikatan Nasional versus Pakatan Harapan come together, can they agree to this potential MB candidate? But when inquired, the Semparangam MP downplayed the news, saying that it is still too early to discuss MB candidacy. So we ask again, Dr. Siva Murugan Pandian, whether or not having Mazli as a candidate of Menteri Besar actually increases Pakatan Harapan's profile or chances of winning the polls. Let's hear Dr. Siva again.
The choice of chief minister is important for an election. Definitely, the candidate will become the poster boy, and I think the candidate must be able to fulfill certain criteria, including whether he is acceptable, likable, winnable, and could lead the state election. In this juncture, I do not know whether Mazli is the right person, but then we know that the suggestion came from one of the state assemblymen. The top leadership have yet to decide, and I think out of the 27 state assemblymen who have served from 2018 to 2022 will also have their voice, whether they want one of them to be selected as a candidate, because at the end, Johor is unique. The demography, the geography, to what extent the candidate is able to be fully responsible on state matter. On Mazli, he's a member of parliament, whether he would be able to carry both responsibility at the federal level and also at the state level is something that I think Pakatan Harapan top leadership would want to consider. But at the end, if there are convincing justification that Mazli is the right candidate, then why not? Of course, they should also consider not only the party leadership candidate, but they must also consider the voters' candidate, whether the voters want him as their alternative choice as the chief minister. We know Barisan Nasional have a good candidate who have good track record throughout the pandemic. Dato' Hasni have performed, and the candidate that Pakatan Harapan wants to put forward will definitely have to be someone who's able to fulfill the big shoe set by Hasni.
So we also know that Mazli Malik has had close collaborations with Muda, particularly with Syed Saddiq. So this would actually bolster that shot in the arm in terms of trying to level up the Pakatan Harapan game in Johor. But still, things are still too early. So do keep an eye out over the next 7 days into how the political landscape is going to shape up in Johor as well as in the federal level as well. We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about the corporate world that has happened last week and what will happen this week. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to The Week Ahead, a show that shall explore the next 7 days. My name is Ibrahim Sani. I'm working from home for the day. Of course, we have to look into what happened on Friday. This is because AirAsia has changed their corporate holding name from whatever that was before to capital A Berhad, effective immediately. This is because CEO Tan Sri Tony Fernandes has argued that when making the announcement, the name change is to reflect the diversity of its business portfolio as it seeks to grow non-airline revenue. And of course, in particular, trying to grow their rideshare business, trying to grow their super app identity and growth as well, particularly on take-up and usability. So there's many that can be explored here. We'll hear some of the news for now before I jump into my own commentary.
The airline retains the AirAsia brand name, but the group will focus more on expanding other businesses, mainly mobile applications for travel and lifestyle, logistics and e-commerce, as well as financial services.
So the focus of the group is those three pillars. There is no, and if you look at every company, they all can benefit from each other, right? So teleports customers can borrow money from BigPay. Super app uses teleport services for our express business, which will compete with DHL in the courier business. So everything is interlinked, and but it's all based on affordability, accessibility, and inclusiveness.
Fernandes said that the group aims to achieve 50% of its revenue from its non-airline business by 2026, and it plans to focus exclusively on the ASEAN region. Like many carriers, AirAsia has been struggling as borders close due to the pandemic. Bursa Malaysia earlier this month classified the company as PN17, or financially distressed, but Fernandes said the classification is merely an accounting issue and does not affect its liquidity.
So as you can see, they are changing their name to better reflect the non-airline revenue. But there are two big items that they did not deal with in the announcement. The first is the Practice Note 17 listing that was made by Bursa Malaysia. And we all know that if you are classified as a PN17, you are either meant to regularize your financials or risk being delisted. That's the first that was not addressed. In my phone conversation with airline expert and former market analyst for the airline business from Maybank Investment, Mohsin Aziz, he's now with Pangolin Aviation Recovery Fund. I spoke at length about how this is going to impact their financials and how it is meant to help them move forward. Mohsin gave a very interesting take on it. I suggest you look at the interview at length on my show Notepad. You can just go for astroawani.com, look for Notepad, find my interview with Mohsin Aziz on AirAsia on that. But basically, generally speaking, it's like it is still a work in progress, and it is still something that needs to be addressed very urgently, which was not addressed on Friday, despite them announcing their results, for last year. So that is something that is, I wouldn't say pending, but would be a work in progress that needs to be looked at. The second, of course, is customer satisfaction. A lot of customers are still demanding for their refunds for the tickets bought or purchased before the pandemic and during the MCO. A lot of customers are also complaining about 1,001 things, particularly when it comes to their non-airline revenue business. So these two items must be addressed very urgently. And I know that the people in Asia is indeed trying their best to make it work, but it is still a case of not addressing the items that the market wants versus addressing the items that the market is not asking. So that is a kind of a conversation that needs to be looked at, and it is, of course, an ongoing one. Next, we move to the CPI of Malaysia, because 2021 CPI indicates that Malaysia is not progressing enough in ensuring the fight against corruption and making it a top priority. So we spoke with Sudegaran Stanley from Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronism, or C4, on speeding up anti-corruption reforms and how the public can contribute to the process.
This can be mainly attributed to the fact that we are actually downtracking on many of the reforms that the government has actually promised throughout the past years and so on. You see, in 2019, Saraya, the government back then had come out with this National Anti-Corruption Plan. And the National Anti-Corruption Plan, the NACP, is a comprehensive document, a plan, initiative or strategy, whatever you call it, that addresses corruption in this country. Now, it was to be implemented from 2019 up to 2023. That means it gives us a 5-year implementation period.
The NACP, he said, focuses on 5 main issues regarding combating corruption in Malaysia, including political finance governance, separation of powers such as the Attorney General and Public Prosecutor, police accountability, and reforms to the MACC.
It talks about the appointment of the Chief Commissioner. It mentions about empowering the agency in terms of the appointment of the Chief Commissioner. It talks about budget allocations. It talks about having an oversight committee and the establishment of the Service Commission and the manpower as well. And today, we see a huge problem in the way the MACC share trading issue, has been dealt with. And it also does not help, when the chief himself is not setting the examples right. He refuses to appear before the Parliamentary Select Committee. He goes after whistleblowers. Now, what is the message that we are sending here? Instead of coming down hard, the government, and to ensure that the entire investigations are conducted transparently and that all questions are answered, they seem not to be taking the matter seriously.
Stanley said one way for the public to contribute in fighting corruption is to hold elected MPs accountable.
And one way for that is to hold their MPs accountable. They should text their MPs and tell their MPs to make sure that the NACP is implemented. Those who support the opposition, make sure that their MPs bring up the issue in Parliament, and those that support the government, make sure that the government actually implements the plan. So this is one way how the public can actually take part in holding the government or their MPs accountable to actually implement the NACP.
To recap, Malaysia's CPI Corruption Perception Index has indeed dropped, for 2 years running. And this is, of course, something that the government is not looking seriously. And of course, we know this for a fact. The question is what we do next. That is a question that can't be resolved in the week ahead, but it is a question that is worth thinking about when we are amongst our friends and family members during the Chinese New Year. One more short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about the pandemic. Welcome back. This is the week ahead. We'll now talk about COVID-19. The government is indeed mulling to further relax SOPs once the administration of booster doses is completed. Malaysia Health Specialist Dr. Farhan Rosli says that Malaysians would be subjected to less testing and shortened quarantine as we move towards an endemic phase.
So 3,000 cases a day, 3,500 per day is reported number of cases. But there will be a large chunk of people who will have been exposed, who would actually be carrying the virus, who are not tested. Now, the reason why the situation now and last year is different is because a lot of people who are not tested are actually people who are actually fully vaccinated. So they perhaps do not show any symptoms and they are not showing any signs of any cough and cold or fever and all this. That's why they don't get themselves vaccinated. And this is something which we have to get ourselves used to, because this is also moving towards the next step of endemicity, where you only get yourself tested if you actually have any symptoms.
Dr. Farhan said it is probably time for us to move away from reporting daily COVID-19 cases.
We should be looking at the number of cases that's being hospitalized, number of ICU cases, and number of deaths, because this is a clearer indication of how severe cases are actually in the country. Because like I said before, you can give me 50,000 cases. If they are all mild and asymptomatic, I'm not as worried as if the number of cases in hospitals actually shoot up. The number of ventilators that's being needed is actually shoot up. So this is where the message to the public needs to be much more clearer, and you need to actually table it to the public. What are the numbers that we're actually seeing?
Despite all this, Dr. Farhan said that mask and physical distancing are here to stay during the endemic phase. Besides that, quarantine may also be waived for COVID-19 close contacts.
Perhaps close contacts will no longer need it to be quarantined unless they are symptomatic. No longer needed to be tested unless they are symptomatic. So now you're going to just be moving along, and to reduce the disruption for people. Because as you know, if you talk about 3,000 people being positive COVID cases, that is not a burden on the national system. But the 3,000 people will probably have 30,000 or 90,000 close contact. So the 90,000 being needed to quarantine, now that is the difficult thing, right? Because then you have disruptions in the workplace, you have disruptions on the factory floor and all these things. So when you move towards endemicity, now you have to put your faith and your trust into the vaccines that you have always advocated, saying that vaccines are the way out. So vaccines are the way into endemicity, and endemicity is the way of us living with COVID.
And of course, related to this is that the authorities are cracking down hard on syndicates selling fake vaccine certificates in the past few weeks. Dr. Farhan shares more seriously about the calls to take down against those that flaunt the rules.
Rather than focusing on these people who actually have gotten themselves vaccinated and boosted, and perhaps that these people actually would have forgotten, or we say a slip of the mind when they fail to wear masks and all these things. The Act 342 amendments should be focused more on the people who refuse to get vaccination, on the people who actually fake the digital certificates and all these things, because you cannot punish people who are trying. I think this is something which is very critical, and you should actually be supporting these people. That's why that approach should be using the carrot, whereby we encourage and using health promotions. But for people who are obviously flouting the law, such as getting fixed vaccine certificates, giving money and purchasing it, which already comes into terms of corruption and all these other things, the act should be focused more on this.
In dealing with the unvaccinated, Dr. Farhan said making vaccination compulsory could be an option.
Now, if it's not mandated by law, it is not illegal for someone to refuse vaccination. You have to remember that, because that's something that must be said as clearly as possible. However, we are encouraging people to actually get the vaccinations done. And the way we do this is that we say that if you get yourself fully vaccinated, you will have access to this sort of services and all these other things, such as public transport, allowed to travel, and also because we are able to control that. But the government must now think, do they want to make it a stance where they want to make COVID-19 vaccination mandatory by law for you to get it? And if it is mandatory, if you don't take it, what is the punishments that goes along with it?
He stressed that there should be a clear distinction between those who are merely unvaccinated and those flouting the law to obtain fake vaccine certificates when imposing harsher punishments.
It's not about being unvaccinated, but it's the act of obtaining fake vaccine certificates. Now that is the illegal part, and that is the part that should be punished, not being unvaccinated. Okay, because being unvaccinated, you're not breaking any laws, right? But if you actually don't want to get yourself vaccinated, that means you already accept that you are unable to access certain services that needs you to get fully vaccinated. But if you take the next step and actually obtain vaccine certificates when you are not vaccinated, now that is absolutely wrong. That's where you clamp down and you be very, very hard and you be very aggressive. Now, this is where you can put people in prison. This is where you can put people into detention centers. You can actually fine them heavily, because now they are actually endangering the public on a mass scale, and they are deceiving the public when they are doing so.
That's it for the week ahead. I would like to wish all those who are celebrating Happy Chinese New Year, 恭喜发财，新年快乐, and have a very good week ahead.